The story of Daniel and the lions is one of the most well-known biblical accounts, often seen as a simple tale of faith and deliverance. However, beneath the surface, it holds profound spiritual and practical lessons that resonate deeply with our lives today. From standing firm in the face of adversity to trusting in divine providence, this story is a rich tapestry of meaning. In this video, we'll explore the deeper significance of Daniel and the lions, uncovering lessons that inspire courage, faith, and unwavering commitment to our beliefs. The story of Daniel begins in a time of great cultural and spiritual tension. As a captive in Babylon, Daniel faced the challenge of living out his faith in an environment that was not only foreign, but often hostile to his beliefs. This test of faith reached a peak when King Darius issued a decree that no one was to pray to any god or man except the king himself for 30 days. The punishment for disobedience was death in the lion's den. This decree was orchestrated by officials who envied Daniel's position and sought to undermine him, knowing his commitment to God would compel him to disobey the order. Daniel's response to this decree reveals the depth of his faith. He didn't protest or try to justify his actions to others. Instead, he quietly and steadfastly continued his practice of praying 3 times a day, with his windows open toward Jerusalem. This act of defiance was not born out of arrogance or rebellion, but out of a profound dedication to his relationship with God. For Daniel, ceasing to pray was unthinkable because his faith was not a part-time commitment, but the very foundation of his life. This test of faith is a powerful reminder of the challenges believers face in remaining true to their convictions. In our own lives, we may encounter situations where societal norms, peer pressure, or even legal challenges tempt us to compromise our beliefs. Daniel's example calls us to reflect on what we value most and to ask ourselves whether we are willing to endure discomfort or even danger to stay true to our principles. His actions remind us that faith is not passive but active. It requires courage and consistency, even when the cost is high. Moreover, Daniel's unwavering response shows that faith is deeply personal, but also profoundly public. He didn't pray to make a show of his defiance, yet his actions were visible and undeniable. This balance between humility and boldness challenges us to consider how we live out our own beliefs. Are we willing to be seen as different or even face criticism for our faith? Daniel's test of faith encourages us to remain steadfast and trust that God honors those who honor him. Prayer played a central role in Daniel's life and became his immediate response to the king's decree. Rather than panic or seek a way to avoid the consequences, Daniel turned to prayer as his source of strength and guidance. His practice of praying 3 times a day was not a reaction to the crisis, but a habit he had cultivated over years. This consistency in prayer reveals its significance in his life, not as a ritual or duty, but as a lifeline to God. Daniel's prayer life was marked by 3 key qualities: discipline, dependence, and devotion. He prayed at set times, demonstrating the importance of carving out dedicated moments to connect with God. This discipline served as a reminder that no matter how busy or challenging life became, his relationship with God took precedence. In our own lives, this calls us to consider the consistency of our prayer habits. Do we make time for God in the midst of our routines, or do we only turn to him in moments of crisis? Daniel's dependence on prayer highlights his recognition that he could not face the challenges of life on his own. By praying, he acknowledged his need for God's wisdom, strength, and protection. This reliance is a powerful contrast to the self-sufficiency that the world often promotes. In our own challenges, prayer invites us to release control and trust in God's power to work in ways beyond our understanding. Finally, Daniel's devotion in prayer reveals the depth of his relationship with God. He prayed with thanksgiving, even in the face of a decree that threatened his life. This gratitude underscores his trust in God's faithfulness, regardless of the outcome. Daniel's example challenges us to examine the focus of our prayers. Are they centered on seeking God's will and expressing gratitude, or are they primarily requests for our own desires? His prayers demonstrate a heart aligned with God, filled with trust and surrender. The power of prayer in Daniel's story is not only in its personal impact, but also in its public witness. When Daniel was caught praying, it became clear to everyone that his allegiance was to God above all else. This public demonstration of faith did not waver, even when faced with the threat of death. In our own lives, prayer can serve as a testament to our trust in God, inspiring others to seek Him in their own journeys. Daniel's reliance on prayer ultimately reminds us that it is not a last resort, but a first response. It is a source of strength, guidance, and peace that sustains us through trials and empowers us to face challenges with courage and faith. By prioritizing prayer as Daniel did, we too can experience its transformative power in our lives. Courage is one of the most striking attributes displayed by Daniel in the face of the lion's den. His story is a testament to the kind of bravery that arises not from a lack of fear, but from an unwavering commitment to what is right and true. Courage, in Daniel's case, was not a momentary burst of strength, but a deeply ingrained principle that guided his actions long before the crisis arose. When King Darius signed the decree forbidding prayer to anyone but himself, Daniel could have chosen the path of least resistance. He could have prayed in secret or postponed his prayers for the 30 days of the decree. Yet, he chose to stand firm, openly displaying his devotion to God without hesitation. This act of courage was a declaration that his allegiance to God outweighed any earthly authority, even one with the power to take his life. True courage, as Daniel demonstrates, is rooted in faith. It does not deny the reality of danger, but confronts it with the assurance that God's purposes are greater than any earthly threat. Daniel did not know whether God would deliver him from the lion's den, but his courage was not contingent on the outcome. He trusted that obedience to God was the right path, regardless of the personal cost. This kind of courage challenges us to consider how we respond to fear and uncertainty in our own lives. Do we allow fear to dictate our decisions, or do we act with faith, trusting in God's sovereignty even when the future is unclear? The context of Daniel's courage is particularly significant. He was a high-ranking official in the Babylonian government, a position that came with privilege, influence, and responsibility. By defying the king's decree, Daniel risked not only his life, but also his reputation and career. This amplifies the magnitude of his bravery, as he chose integrity over personal gain. For many of us, the temptation to compromise is strongest when there is something valuable to lose, whether it's a job, a relationship, or social approval. Daniel's example reminds us that true courage is willing to sacrifice worldly benefits for the sake of eternal principles. Another important aspect of Daniel's courage is its quiet, steadfast nature. He did not make a public spectacle of his defiance or seek to draw attention to himself. He simply continued his daily practice of prayer, confident that God saw his heart and his actions. This quiet courage contrasts with the bravado often associated with acts of defiance. Daniel's bravery was not about proving a point or gaining recognition. It was about remaining faithful to God. This subtle but profound distinction challenges us to examine the motivations behind our own acts of courage. Are they driven by a desire for validation, or are they rooted in a deep commitment to what is right? Daniel's courage also had a ripple effect, influencing those around him. His steadfastness and integrity ultimately led King Darius to acknowledge the power of Daniel's God. This demonstrates that acts of courage, especially those motivated by faith, have the potential to inspire and transform others. Even those who may initially oppose us can be moved by the consistency and conviction of our actions. In this way, courage is not only a personal virtue, but also a powerful witness to the strength and faithfulness of God. In our own lives, courage often manifests in less dramatic but equally significant ways. It might mean speaking up for what is right in a meeting, standing by a friend who is being treated unfairly, or refusing to participate in unethical practices at work. These everyday acts of bravery require the same inner strength that Daniel displayed in the face of the lion's den. They call us to prioritize our principles over convenience and to trust that God will honor our faithfulness even when the outcome is uncertain. Daniel's story reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. It is a choice to stand firm in our convictions, trusting in God's power and purpose. By following his example, we can cultivate the kind of courage that not only sustains us through challenges, but also serves as a light to others, pointing them toward the hope and strength found in faith. The moment Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, it would have seemed to all observers that his fate was sealed. The den, filled with hungry lions, represented an inevitable and gruesome end. Yet, as the story unfolds, we see one of the most dramatic demonstrations of divine protection and providence in the Bible. God intervened in a miraculous way, shutting the mouths of the lions and preserving Daniel's life. This act was not just a display of power, but a profound revelation of God's care, faithfulness, and ability to work beyond human understanding. Divine protection in Daniel's story does not mean the absence of danger. In fact, Daniel faced the full weight of the threat. He was arrested, brought before the king, and thrown into the lion's den without any indication that deliverance would come. This highlights an important truth. God's protection does not always shield us from trials, but often carries us through them. Daniel's experience reminds us that faith does not exempt us from challenges, but equips us to endure them with confidence in God's presence. The way God delivered Daniel is also significant. He could have prevented Daniel from being accused or stopped the decree from being issued. Instead, he allowed Daniel to face the trial and then intervened in a way that demonstrated his power to everyone involved. By shutting the mouths of the lions, God showed that his authority surpasses even the most fearsome forces of nature. This teaches us that God's protection is not limited by human constraints or circumstances. He works in ways that reveal his glory and strengthen the faith of those who trust in him. For Daniel, the lion's den became a place of peace rather than destruction. This transformation of a deadly situation into a testimony of God's power is a recurring theme in Scripture, and a reminder that God can bring good out of even the most dire circumstances. It calls us to consider how we view the challenges in our own lives. Do we see them as insurmountable obstacles, or do we trust that God can use them for his purposes? Daniel's story encourages us to shift our perspective, recognizing that God's providence is always at work, even when the outcome is uncertain. The story also reveals the relational nature of God's protection. Daniel's deliverance was not a random act of power, but a response to his faithfulness and trust in God. The text explicitly states that God delivered Daniel because he trusted in him. This underscores the importance of cultivating a relationship with God grounded in faith and obedience. Divine protection is not a guarantee of an easy life, but a reflection of God's presence and care for those who rely on him. Moreover, the timing of God's intervention is a powerful reminder of his sovereignty. God did not act before Daniel was thrown into the den, but allowed the situation to unfold to the point where deliverance seemed impossible. This highlights the importance of trusting God's timing, even when it feels like he is delaying. In our own lives, we may face situations where we long for immediate relief, yet God's plan involves waiting or enduring for a greater purpose. Daniel's story reassures us that God's timing is always perfect and that his deliverance often comes in ways that bring him the most glory. The impact of Daniel's deliverance extended far beyond his personal safety. When King Darius saw that Daniel had been spared, he was moved to acknowledge the power of Daniel's God. He issued a decree that all people in his kingdom should fear and reverence the God of Daniel, declaring that he is the living God who endures forever. This demonstrates how acts of divine protection serve as a witness to others, pointing them toward God's greatness and faithfulness. Daniel's deliverance was not just about preserving his life, but about revealing God's power to the entire kingdom. For us, the story of Daniel in the lion's den serves as a reminder that God's protection is both personal and purposeful. It reassures us that we are never alone in our trials and that God is actively working on our behalf, even when we cannot see it. It also challenges us to trust in his providence, knowing that he is in control and that his plans are for our good and his glory. This divine protection is not limited to dramatic, miraculous events like Daniel's. In our daily lives, God's hand is at work in countless ways, shielding us from harm, guiding our steps, and providing for our needs. While we may not always recognize it, his care is constant and unwavering. Daniel's story invites us to reflect on the ways God has protected and provided for us, cultivating gratitude and trust in his faithfulness. Ultimately, Daniel's deliverance from the lion's den points to a greater truth about God's providence. It reminds us that while we may face trials, God's power is greater than any threat we encounter. His protection is not about removing us from difficulties, but about sustaining us through them and using them to accomplish his purposes. By trusting in his providence, we can face life's challenges with the confidence that, like Daniel, we are held in the hands of a faithful and powerful God. The story of Daniel and the lions does not end with his miraculous deliverance. In many ways, it begins a ripple effect that transforms the world around him. The testimony of Daniel's faith and God's power reaches not only King Darius, but the entire kingdom. This impact demonstrates that acts of faith and courage are rarely isolated. They have the potential to inspire, influence, and even change the hearts of others in profound ways. When Daniel emerged unscathed from the lion's den, King Darius was astonished. Here was undeniable evidence of a power greater than any earthly force, a power that had delivered Daniel from what seemed to be certain death. The king's immediate reaction was to declare that Daniel's God was the living God, whose kingdom would never be destroyed and whose dominion would last forever. This decree was not just an acknowledgement of God's greatness, but a public proclamation that carried the weight of royal authority. It ensured that people throughout the kingdom heard about the power of Daniel's God, spreading the message far and wide. Daniel's testimony was not simply his words, but his life. His unwavering commitment to God, even in the face of death, gave credibility to the miracle that followed. This demonstrates the importance of integrity and consistency in our own witness. People are more likely to be moved by the way we live out our faith than by what we say about it. Daniel's life serves as a powerful reminder that our actions often speak louder than our words, and that steadfastness in trials can become a beacon of hope and inspiration for those around us. The transformation of King Darius is particularly noteworthy. Before the events of the lion's den, the king had issued a decree that no one could pray to any god or man except himself. Yet, after witnessing God's power, he publicly humbled himself and gave glory to the God of Daniel. This dramatic shift highlights the power of a testimony rooted in faith and courage. It shows that even those in positions of great power or opposition can be moved to acknowledge God when they encounter the evidence of his work. Daniel's testimony also extended beyond the king to influence the entire kingdom. By issuing a decree in honor of Daniel's God, King Darius ensured that people across the empire were exposed to the reality of God's power and sovereignty. This reflects the broader impact that individual acts of faith can have on a community, a nation, or even the world. When we remain faithful in the face of challenges, our actions have the potential to inspire others and draw them closer to God. The story of Daniel also reveals that our trials are not only about us. While Daniel's faith was central to his deliverance, the ultimate purpose of his experience was to glorify God and bring others to know him. This shifts our perspective on the challenges we face in our own lives. We may be tempted to focus on the personal impact of our trials, but Daniel's story reminds us that God often uses our experiences to accomplish greater purposes. Our response to adversity can become a testimony that points others to his faithfulness and power. The ripple effect of Daniel's testimony extends to future generations as well. His story has been preserved in Scripture and continues to inspire believers around the world. This enduring legacy demonstrates the lasting impact of a life lived in faith. When we trust in God and stand firm in our convictions, the effects of our actions can reach far beyond our immediate circumstances, leaving a legacy that influences others for years to come. Daniel's testimony also challenges us to consider how we use our own experiences to glorify God. Do we share stories of his faithfulness with others? Do we live in a way that reflects his love and power? Like Daniel, we are called to be witnesses to the greatness of God, using our lives as a platform to point others toward him. This doesn't always require dramatic acts of courage. Often, it is through the quiet consistency of our faith and the way we respond to everyday challenges that we make the greatest impact. The story of Daniel and the lions ultimately reminds us that our lives are part of a larger narrative. God is always at work, using our faithfulness to accomplish his purposes and reach others with his love. Daniel's experience in the lion's den was not just about his deliverance. It was about proclaiming the power and sovereignty of God to a watching world. This invites us to see our own challenges in a new light, recognizing that they may be opportunities for God to work through us and touch the lives of those around us. As we reflect on Daniel's testimony, we are reminded of the incredible potential of a life fully surrendered to God. His courage, faith, and steadfastness became a catalyst for transformation, influencing not only his immediate circumstances, but the hearts and minds of countless others. His story inspires us to live with the same boldness and trust, knowing that God can use even our greatest challenges to accomplish his purposes and bring glory to his name.